Hurricanes Ike, Rita, Katrina, and Tropical Storm Allison. A decade of disaster along the Gulf Coast. $115 billion in damage and uncountable suffering. God, we are days away from a new tropical storm season and an anniversary reminder from the deadliest and costliest tropical storm ever to hit the United States.
Now, a KPRC Local 2 special, Tropical Storm Allison, 10 years later, with Chief Meteorologist Frank Billingsley.
Well, good evening from Galveston, everyone, and a windy evening it is. As you can tell, it somehow sets the tone to talk about tropical storms and hurricanes. It's ironic, we're all in a drought, all of Texas, 100% drought, but we need some of that tropical rain. We just don't want it from a Tropical Storm Allison or a Hurricane Ike. Remember this statue during Hurricane Ike? Keep in mind the seawall is 16 feet high and the waves were just crashing incredibly over the seawall. It was enough to certainly make you take note that when another hurricane season opens, we have to pay attention. It's upon us, June 1st. And while August and September are always the more active months for tropical weather here along the coast, we can't let our guard down. It was the first week of June 10 years ago when the most devastating rains that our country has ever seen, more than 30 inches, and in fact I remember 36 on the northeast side and as much as 42 in some spots inches of rain fell on our area. Tonight our Local 2 severe weather team, all of us are here to get you through this journey. Cambrell Marshall, Mary Lee, and Anthony Yanis join me as we look forward and back to the storm that reminds us of the potential danger at the start of each tropical season. Tropical Storm Allison started as a disturbance in the Gulf of Mexico. This started at 4 o'clock, really today, and we're not even 12 hours into it. No one expected it would end up going on record as one of the most devastating rain events in U.S. history.
Because when it stopped raining, we thought that the water was finally going to recede.
In just days, the storm would dump 80% of the area's average annual rainfall.
I'm walking through somebody's backyard.
2 million people were affected. 22 people died in our area. 19 of those died from driving or walking into high water.
Our hearts go out for those individuals who had loss of life in particular.
The National Weather Service issued a flash flood warning 3 hours before the first fatality and 5 hours before the first drowning.
We were on board one of those rescue boats.
When Allison was finally finished, a total of 41 people were killed across the country, 95,000 cars and trucks were damaged, 73,000 homes were damaged, 30,000 people were stranded in shelters, and $5 billion in damage was done to property. It is the first tropical storm ever to have its name retired, alongside storms like Katrina, Rita, and Ike. It's bringing in a southerly flow of air off the Gulf. Allison's slow and erratic progress moving inland and then back to the Gulf set it apart from every storm to hit Texas in the past century. 10 years later, and forecasters are still studying Allison's path and that 1-2-3 punch that it gave our community. Local 2 meteorologist Cambrell Marshall is in downtown Houston, which was underwater during Allison, and now, of course, we like to get a little rain. Cambrell, you and I watched this storm take an unusual path together, remember?
Yeah, Frank, I remember how many hours we were on the air watching that storm and watching the amazing damage as it unfolded in front of our eyes. And now there's been an analysis done of the path of Tropical Storm Allison, just how soon that storm developed as it hit southeast Texas and became a storm to remember. The storm that ultimately became the most destructive tropical storm in U.S. history began as a tropical wave off Africa on May 21st. In 5 days, it had traveled west and over northern South America before continuing west across Central America and into the eastern Pacific on June 1st. By June 4th, it had moved north through the Bay of Campeche and toward Galveston, where by the afternoon of June 5th, it became Tropical Storm Allison. As Allison moved inland and quickly lost wind strength and tropical storm status, but was still plenty wet, and rainfall records were set on most of the 5 days that Allison stayed in southeast Texas. Now, that storm moved north across Houston on the night of the 6th, and by June 7th, as a depression, Allison stalled near Lufkin. It then began a southwesterly turn on Friday the 8th and into the 9th, and that's when things began to get even more difficult. Allison was dropping more than 5 inches of rain an hour, adding to the almost 36 inches left behind by Allison in southeast Texas. Incredibly, this storm still had much more life, and from June 9th through the 17th, it traveled east-northeast through 8 more states, killing dozens and causing millions more in damage to become the costliest and deadliest tropical storm in U.S. history. A tropical storm that lasted 27 days and covered thousands of miles, certainly a storm for the record books. Speaking of records, the record flooding in downtown Houston, the theater district, the tunnels, all suffered tremendous amounts of damage. We'll take a look at lessons learned a little later.
Thank you, Cambrell. We'll never forget it. You know, so many neighborhoods were hit so hard by Tropical Storm Allison. One that we really remember was the Crestmont neighborhood. That's off MLK by Sims Bayou. Sims really had a go of it. Neighbors there are still talking about this life-changing storm.
We were standing up on them bricks, and water was up here to our chin. Like the elderly people, they couldn't get out. They had to bring the airboats in to get them. You couldn't even see the top of the house.
Reginald Sparks and his neighbors sit out and talk about living through the worst part of Tropical Storm Allison.
We lost everything. You couldn't even see nothing in here. It was just like a big ocean. But they couldn't get us for 2 days because we was stuck here.
But eventually, help came on dump trucks and rescue boats.
As our rescue boat actually was going down the street, we ended up at a group home. And at this group home, firefighters actually had to step down off of their boat. They stepped down and they found several residents who were handicapped at this home who needed help.
They were very frightened to get on the boat. But they got on the boat and they went to the shelter at Madison High School. And they stayed there a couple of days. Yes, I was afraid. I was afraid because of my kids. They were afraid. So, you know, that's frightening when your kids are afraid.
Charles Cameron and his family got out as fast as they could. The water in his house on Lakefield Street came halfway up the bricks. His house backs up to Sims Bayou.
Mine and that one got the worst.
Cameron didn't have flood insurance. Everything in the home was destroyed, along with his car and 2 trucks. He says it took 4 to 5 years of repairs before things were back to normal after Allison. He hopes a larger gutter put in by his house after Allison and the widening of Sims Bayou will help protect him from the next time it rains so hard.
It was a mess. It's the worst I ever saw. And I hope I never see it again.
The thoughts of many of us. Well, the Texas Medical Center was another area that was just devastated by floodwaters during the storm. And lessons learned during Allison and changes made actually helped protect the medical center during Hurricane Ike. So that was one at least good thing about it. But local 2 meteorologist Mary Lee is in the medical center with more on their storm plans.
That's right, Frank. They are ready for the worst out here. I had a chance to speak to safety specialists with the UT Medical Building. They were out testing every flood door and every flood gate to make sure their building would be safe in a storm.
It was hard to describe.
Robert Emery remembers Tropical Storm Allison all too well.
Because I was actually one of the first people here. Our house had been flooded, not too bad, but I actually wound up having to walk here. And when I got here, I could not believe the amount of water that had accumulated in the loading dock area, and then to realize that that was all the way across.
What Emery saw that day was devastating. It's something he wouldn't believe if he hadn't lived through it.
I don't think people realized how much water could accumulate from what I believe to be one of the most expensive tropical storm losses in the history of the United States.
An incredible amount of water flooded the UT Health Medical School, about 10 million gallons of water. You can see that brown line there, that's just how high the water rose. You're looking at about 33 feet off the ground.
So I couldn't believe it because I knew how deep it was below. Matter of fact, I knew there were vehicles down there. It was an amazing experience. And it took 3 days just to pump the water out.
The damage was enormous, $87 million. Valuable records and lab specimens floating near the ceiling. 5,000 research animals were lost. It took a month to get back to normal operations. It was a painful lesson on a tropical storm's flash flooding power.
I've heard plenty of horror stories about mostly monetary issues as far as what it costs, but they've got a pretty good system set up now.
That's actually aquarium glass there. The glass, if you hit it, you can feel how hard it is, but it's actually quite robust.
Tighten it up, Pablo.
The UT Health Medical School now has waterproof walls, large floodgates, and 23 flood doors surrounding the building to keep the rising waters out. Also, water collection pits are in place to trap floodwaters before they reach the building, with special pumps to remove the water. The cost of the new flood protection project, $20 million. But if it can prevent disastrous effects like Tropical Storm Allison from ever happening again, safety specialists say it's more than worth it.
Of course, I learned never to say never, but we are certainly much better prepared, both strategically and with all these protections in place. And the university, and I know our colleagues across the Texas Medical Center, take it very seriously.
That's it.
And by the way, workers can shut every flood door in the building in a matter of just minutes. Well, coming up in our Hurricane Survival Guide, I'll show you how emergency responders in Galveston are training to keep you safe in our upcoming hurricane season. Frank?
Long hours worked by our emergency personnel during Tropical Storm Allison and before the storm season to make plans to prepare what may come our way. But you know, sometimes even the most trained emergency personnel are not prepared for what a tropical storm like Allison can bring. By air,
Can she walk?
land, Houston area emergency personnel performed amazing rescues during Tropical Storm Allison.
Our job and duty was to make sure that the citizens were safe.
We watched and reported on countless life-saving rescues during the storm.
Okay,
Precinct 3 Constable Jason Robillay helped get a 4-month-old to safety, a child who had been stranded overnight in floodwaters with her aunt.
Like I said, it takes you right back to the day it happened.
And then Sergeant, now Lieutenant Jeff Stauber, helped rescue a very pregnant woman. Her Greenspoint apartment complex was surrounded by water. And her water broke. Her labor was so intense, she couldn't walk. Her husband flagged down Stauber.
Our experience kicked in where, we got to help this lady. The ambulances couldn't get up as far as where the boat, where the boat ran out of water, more or less. So I remember us contacting a guy that had a pickup truck close by, and we loaded her in the back of the pickup, and of course he took her off to where the ambulances were staging.
Stauber says during the rescue he was thinking about how to deliver a baby.
I certainly did not want that to happen on that boat at that time.
It was his first time to perform water rescues.
It makes you a little nervous too, especially being out there in a boat. You don't, in the floodwaters, you don't know what you're going over top of or what's underneath the water. If you got the fire ants, you got snakes and everything else that come along with floodwaters.
But he says their efforts were worth it, and he gained something on that day 10 years ago too.
I think it caused me from that day forward to kind of look at my own situation and try to be a better person and contribute to society.
So many amazing rescues during Allison. Well, it wasn't just people getting rescued. Next, getting the pets to higher ground.
And how important is flood insurance? I'll show you how many homes flooded in Allison that weren't in a designated floodplain.
And stories from inside the Texas Medical Center the night the power went out during Allison.
Well, they told us that we need everybody on the floor to have their baby.
Is that a pig? Oh my God, Rick, you've got to come to us live. Somebody's carrying a pig. Okay, where was it, and how was it affected by the pig? How was it affected by the pig? How was it affected by the flood? Okay, well, this pig is getting...
It wasn't just people affected by the flood. Livestock and pets were all looking for higher ground. The rain from Tropical Storm Allison came up so quickly, people didn't have time to prepare themselves or their pets to evacuate.
Do you have any food?
During our coverage in 2001, we found Al Amaral stranded on the roof of a concession stand at a motocross track he owned near Lake Houston. As the water rose, he broke through the roof and sat up there with his 7 dogs for 36 hours until a rescue boat came. He started tossing the dogs off the roof to be rescued first.
These poor babies. The dogs.
Amaral survived Allison, And friends say even another flood where he lost the taped copy of this rescue friends had made for him. He lived for almost 10 years after Allison, but passed away last month in Fort Worth. The new owner of the track says the concession stand where Amaral and his dogs found refuge from the storm had to be torn down and rebuilt. Work had to be done to rebuild downtown Houston after Allison, too. Well, the city made changes to the flooded-out tunnel system, and the theater district had to be rebuilt. Local 2 meteorologist Cambrell Marshall is downtown with more on the changes made after Allison.
Starting Tuesday, June 5th, all of southeast Texas was under the influence of Tropical Storm Allison. There were record amounts of rain falling almost daily during that period of time, but it was that one 8 to 10 hour period, June 8th into June 9th, that dealt an almost crippling blow to downtown Houston.
After 4 days of record amounts of rain, the heaviest rains the night of June 8th proved too much for Houston's infrastructure. 4 of the area's 22 major bayous topped 100-year flood levels. Buffalo and White Oak converged near downtown, and the world's largest pedestrian tunnel system was no match. 16 square blocks of underground Houston and many connecting venues were flooded.
Here at the Alley Theater, this is the Newhouse stage. This area was flooded with 10 feet of water, caused about $10 million in damages, and took about a year to get back into shape.
Across the street and under the stage where the Houston Symphony is practicing, the tab was about $8 million. A line on the wall marks the height of the water that plowed through Symphony offices, destroying priceless instruments and 88 years worth of music.
This is music that was actually saved from the flood.
The music library is now several levels up, one of the many safeguards now in place.
Lessons that we've learned, things like having computer servers above ground and backup tapes.
The city has learned too. Remember, this all started underground, where bayou water was overwhelming. The simple fix, in case of a flood emergency, install and then close the right floodgate or door.
Problem is that Houston's flat, the tunnels are all about the same level, so once water gets in, it goes everywhere. And so part of the reason for the floodgates and the flood doors was to try and contain it in certain areas, much like they do on a submarine or a ship where they seal off compartments if they get flooding. It's a similar concept here.
A solid solution to a problem we hope to never have again.
10 years later, and many lessons learned and many improvements made throughout the area as well. Incredibly, the Houston Symphony is still trying to recover in some areas. Seems those $100,000 grand pianos a little tough to replace. Coming up, we're going to talk about some lessons learned by the folks at TransStar. They think they have the best way for you and your family to get out safely if you have to evacuate. That's coming up.
Thank you, Cambrell. You know, our infrastructure from Houston to Galveston is stronger because of storms like Allison and Ike. Those storms point out problems, and then we make the efforts to correct those problems, sometimes more quickly than others. Local 2 meteorologist Anthony Yanis is along Brays Bayou with a huge project that was undertaken after Allison to help prevent flooding. Anthony?
And Frank, it was this bayou that was responsible for the medical center flooding. As the torrential rain fell, the water levels rose and then drifted slowly off to the south toward the medical center. Now, since that time, Harris County has enlarged the storm drains, installed new water and sewer lines. Also, when the next major rain event happens, less water will make it to the medical center.
We've had so much rain in the last 24 hours that I say it's as bad as it gets. It could get worse, I guess.
It's far beyond the 500-year event.
I think it's still going to come up somewhat.
It's an unprecedented storm for us.
Seems like a lot of people now realize just how bad it is, and they're not coming through this particular part.
65% of the area that flooded during Tropical Storm Allison was not in a mapped floodplain. So many people who didn't have flood insurance flooded during this storm, including 71-year-old Robert Thomas Peterson, who lived behind Sims Bayou. He dropped his insurance right before Allison hit.
Yes, ma'am. About 6 weeks before the storm.
Peterson remembers people being taken out of his neighborhood in dump trucks.
Oh, well, I do remember. I was scary, too. Everything was scary about it. I didn't think I was going to make it.
But so much of the rain that fell during Allison far exceeded that 500-year storm, which for a long time we considered, a worst-case scenario storm.
The Harris County Flood Control District, in a voluntary home buyout program with FEMA, bought 3,000 homes in the county after Allison. The homes along Sims Bayou, Cypress Creek, White Oak Bayou, and the San Jacinto River were demolished, and the families were moved to higher ground.
We can help them move to another home outside the floodplain, and we demolish their home and we allow that land to function as a natural floodplain, which is what it wants to be in the first place.
Flooding is the #1 natural threat to our area, and it doesn't help that we're extremely flat. In fact, an engineer with the Harris County Flood Control estimated that if you take 2 dimes and put them under the legs of a pool table, that's the equivalent of the slope from Houston to Galveston Bay. So about 2,500 miles of channels are used to drain this flat region. If you put those channels from end to end, that is basically the distance from Los Angeles to New York. In an effort to protect more homes and businesses from the next flood, Brays Bayou is being widened.
Where we are widening 21 miles of Brays Bayou, and we've excavated 4 regional detention basins adjacent to Brays Bayou that literally have a combined capacity of 7 Astrodomes of water. So imagine filling the Astrodome 7 times. That's how much water those detention basins can hold.
And 19 miles of Sims Bayou is also being widened and deepened. When the project is complete next year, the Flood Control District says 35,000 homes and 2,000 businesses will be removed from the 100-year floodplain.
If we had another rainfall like Allison, we would see less flooding, but we would still see flooding because Allison was so off the charts in terms of magnitude.
Of course, even with these measures, if it rains hard enough, we are going to flood, and that's why it's vital to have flood insurance. Now, if you aren't in a designated floodplain, it doesn't mean you don't need flood insurance. It means that it's going to be less expensive for you. Frank?
Thanks, Anthony. In the meantime, the dramatic 14 hours of Tropical Storm Allison was actually made into a movie. Did you see it? Just how Hollywood depicted Tropical Storm Allison coming up. Also hear from a mother who had just delivered her first child when the lights went out in the medical center.
We delivered at like 9:30 and then the power immediately went out.
And later in our Hurricane Survival Guide, I'll show you how Galveston is preparing for a new storm season with a dramatic drill.
Well, you may have missed it, but a movie was actually made about Tropical Storm Allison. It was called 14 Hours, A True Story. The movie stars JoBeth Williams, Ricky Schroeder, and Chris Christopherson. It was based on 14 hours inside Memorial Hermann Hospital during the storm. Living out the real-life version of the storm inside Memorial Hermann Hospital was Kathleen Wilson.
Go swing!
Kathleen Wilson and husband Dan still live in their house in North Houston, only now it's filled with 2, soon to be 3 children.
They're crazy, but they're fun.
10 years ago on a day like this one, a pregnant Kathleen was at Memorial Hospital ready to deliver.
Yeah, it was a full house and my water was broken. They were like, go sit in the waiting room.
By nightfall, she was in full labor and ready to push with no idea floodwaters were filling up the basement.
We delivered at like 9:30 and then the power immediately went out. We were the only family that thought to bring a radio with batteries. We're very, very popular though. So we had lots of visitors. The toilets started to get back up probably about 11 o'clock at night. And there was no food. There was no drugs. There was no Tylenol. It was really bad. But you know, I mean, all I can say about what we saw is those people in the medical center were amazing. So people are running up and down the stairs all night, taking turns, bagging ICU patients because none of the respirators worked. And I mean, the nurses were just beyond exhausted. And one of the nurses was laid across the counter just crying. And it wasn't, you know, awful. I mean, she wasn't bawling. She was just crying, you know, and it was really hard for them. We got evac'd out as a group. Everybody who left with us was walkable. So all the moms carried their babies and we all walked out of the hospital together. But it didn't hit me how bad it was until we were evacuated and we stepped onto the first floor and we were in this much water. And when we walked outside, it was like a scene from MASH, you know. It were just ambulances and helicopters. I mean, it was crazy. I think about it every day, yeah.
Lily's birth story has become a bittersweet memory.
The day I took her in, they gave her an ultrasound and they found 5 congenital heart defects in her little heart. She was 12 weeks old the day we drove to the hospital with her. But she died. And So that's the reason I think about it every day, is because it was life-changing for me in so many ways. And I love June 8th, and I love when it rains on June 8th. The whole city of Houston remembers that day. And it's so nice to have everybody stop and pause for her birthday, even if it's not for her birthday. They don't know that, but that's okay.
Now they will know, Kathleen, and thank you for sharing that. So stick around. Next we turn to hurricane season and the 2011 Hurricane Survival Guide. We're going to speak with the nation's top experts and get their prediction for a hurricane hitting the Gulf Coast. We'll show you a dramatic drill that's been held right here on the seawall and talk about evacuations and find out why not as many people in our area may be losing power during the next hurricane. We'll be right back.